welcome to the Wanderlust Herbal Podcast with me, Fiona Morris. It's a podcast about wild remedies and nature's wisdom around the world. And today I am joined by my wonderful guest, Fiona Gray, a herbalist of Blessed Botanicals. Hi, Fiona.
Hi, Fiona.
The two fees.
Yeah, it's funny hearing your own name spoken
Isn't it?
aloud.
Yeah. So thank you again for joining, and I'm really excited to dive into your herbal journey today and explore herbs in the context of our mutual love for travel and meeting plants in different places, being inspired by herbalists from different lands, and um, I feel like the the place that I'd like to start is how you got into your herbal path. And I know that you had already been into gardening prior to, in fact, let's go all the way back to the very beginning. Tell me about your first encounters with plants and nature and how plants first started speaking to you all the way back when you feel it that it began.
Yeah, okay, thank you. Firstly, thank you for having me here. It's such a joy and a pleasure to be talking with you.
Likewise.
Yeah, and I'm excited for our conversation too.
Hmm.
Yeah, so I can remember from really early on being a bit of an Alice in Wonderland with the plant world,
Mm.
always communicating on some level, and only now reflecting back, realize that that's what it was. Um, we lived on a farm by a river with a creek at the back door, and my brother and I would often just go wild, roaming in the jungle, in the forest, in the bush, or down by the river. But often I would also be alone in these activities. And yeah, looking back now, it was such soul food. And yeah, I've never really felt more alive than in those moments, just
Mm.
being completely wild in nature, no time constraints. It was back in the day where you kind of disappeared all day long and came home for dinner and the
Mm.
parents didn't worry about you. And
Hmm.
yeah, so he had quite a freeing feeling at a really young age. Yeah, so that was my first recollection of connection with nature, I would say.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
And so you had that beautiful freedom to roam as a child, and just intuitive way of wending your way within the wild spaces around you. And I'm aware that later on you decided to get into gardening. So is that something that happened kind of in your early adulthood, or what was your journey into working with plants initially?
Yeah. I don't actually recall the moment, but I
Hmm.
do remember vividly asking my father if I could make a vegetable garden.
Hmm.
Both of my paternal grandparents were avid vegetable producers and
Hmm.
fruit growers.
Hmm.
And my maternal grandparents were dairy farmers.
Hmm.
So I always had that, that connection to land and
Hmm.
and primary production.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, I remember asking my dad if I could make a vegetable garden and being shown how to do that, and then taking over at some point, showing him how to do it and what I thought what needed to happen.
Hmm.
And yeah, so I reckon I would have been around 10 or 11. Yeah, so that was my first garden
Right.
I made. Um,
Aha.
I can't
And
tell
you've
you what I grew, but
not herbs at the time, not medicinal herbs.
no,
Well, maybe
no.
edible ones.
Yeah, I remember it being all about vegetables at that moment.
Hmm.
We had
Hmm.
some fruit trees on the land as well, but
Lovely.
remembering just that rich sense of having feet and
Hmm.
hands in the dirt.
Mm.
I was always barefoot as a child,
Hmm.
except in the midst of winter when it was frosty and I'd have to, put on something warmer.
Sure.
But I just loved being barefoot and, just feeling the earth beneath my toes.
Mm,
Yeah.
amazing. So, so you've been had been working as a gardener for quite some time, and you later, from an anecdote that you shared with me earlier, um, in one of your gardening project, one of the clients that you were working for, you were telling me about sort of feeling drawn to a clump of weeds and discovering this quite magical apparition, so to speak.
Yeah,
Can you share a
yeah.
little bit more about how that all came about?
Yeah, I'd love to. It's such a magical story and
Mm-hmm.
I love sharing it. So I'd been working really, really hard and I was quite exhausted and burnt out. And I'd moved to this cabin in the bush in Australia and it was owned by a friend of mine. So she was my landlord and she lived there too. Um, and I decided when I moved there that I wasn't going to create yet another garden, which I tend to do everywhere I go in the world.
Yes.
And I really just needed some deep rest. And
Mm-hmm.
so I'd made that, that firm decision. Okay, this is what deep rest looks like and
Yeah.
self-care looks like.
Mm.
Until one day I was trotting off up the pathway to the outhouse and spied some weeds that were growing along the pathway and decided that I just couldn't resist pulling them out. And when I started to pull them out, I realized that there was lying underneath the weeds were this perfect spiral made of stones sitting on the ground.
Mm. Mm-hmm.
And it blew me away a little. It was, not what I expected to find, firstly. And I asked my friend who owned the land if she knew anything about its origins, and she was quite surprised as well. She'd known the land for 15 years and had no idea how it was formed, where it came from.
Wow.
Nobody had lived there prior to us. Nobody had gardened there or tended the land. And so that got me piqued, my curiosity piqued, and I was curious. And yeah, and I wanted to know more. I wanted to know, you know, what this was, and felt like it was a bit of a sign from the universe of something.
Mm. Mm-hmm.
And also having a bit of an affinity with spirals as well. So it was extra special to discover that. Yeah, so I later that afternoon meditated on that with the intention of, receiving information
Mm-hmm.
and received inspiration that um, that I was to plant some women's medicinal herbs,
Ooh.
which I was quite surprised about because I knew nothing about herbal medicine.
Okay.
And there was an amazing herbalist in town who I thought was a really cool lady, and she was
Mm-hmm.
uh, very land care based and quirky and fun, and I admired her a lot. And so that was
Mm-hmm.
my only reference to herbal medicine at the time.
Right.
So I had no idea what a women's medicinal herbal garden was meant to, you know, was
Mm-hmm.
meant to look like. So I did some research and went online, um, found some seeds, ordered the seeds, they arrived, and I planted them. Um, yeah, it was the beginning.
Beautiful.
Yeah, the
And I'm
beginning of something
curious,
amazing.
yeah, there's various questions that are springing up in response to that. But my first curiosity is, do you remember what seeds you planted? What was in your first medicinal herb garden?
I remember hyssop.
Ah,
For some reason, it was the only herb I remember that was in there. Isn't that
mm-hmm.
crazy?
Yes.
Um, but I guess at the time it was all new, and
Yeah.
yeah, I didn't really know what I was doing,
Right.
and was blindly being, led by these whispers.
Mm-hmm.
There was chase tree as well,
Okay.
Vitex,
Yep.
which, as we know, is an incredible, herb for women's reproductive
Yes.
health.
Yes.
Yeah, and I lived there for about 2 years. So I watched this
Mm-hmm.
garden grow and tended it, lovingly.
Mm-hmm.
And I think in those days it was just about the beginning, it was the beginning of the journey. And
Mm.
it wasn't actually for another, I think, 4 years until I went off and studied. So it was the
Right.
the first seeds of herbalism for me.
Oh, beautiful. So that was your connection with a local herbalist, and she helped to guide your your intuitive spark to create a garden for your friend's space. And I love the connection with the spiral as well, and
Yeah,
that's also a special symbol for you. I mean,
yeah.
certainly as a sparker of your eventual herbal path into becoming a herbalist and so on. And when we were chatting earlier, you mentioned that you like to create gardens wherever you go. Can you share a little about the gardens that you have created along the way and where they have? I know you're based in Australia and originally from New Zealand, so I'm curious to know where these gardens might have sprung up and a little
Hopefully
bit more
still
about that.
standing as
I
well.
hope so.
So
Yeah.
yeah, so I've moved around a lot in Australia. I've lived
Mm-hmm.
primarily up and down the East Coast,
Mm-hmm.
but also on Norfolk Island, where I lived a couple of times.
Right.
I've grown mostly vegetables, and
Mm-hmm.
so I came from that very practical beginning of,
Yeah.
producing my own food,
Mm.
and then moved into the appreciation of flowers.
Mm-hmm.
At the insistence of a friend of mine who loves flowers,
Right.
and she taught me that the that flowers are equally as important, to the
Uh-huh.
soul and to the body
Right.
for medicine.
Yes.
Even if the medicine is merely through the lens of the eyes,
Mm-hmm.
admiring the beauty,
Mm-hmm.
and also that connectedness of attracting pollinators into the garden also, which I later learnt was a big part of the whole picture of producing food.
Mm-hmm.
And then, of course, a lot later came the herbs. But
Right.
yeah, the gardens I've created have been primarily food based with flowers and later herbs.
Mm-hmm.
And the most memorable that's springing to mind right now was on that very same land. I created what I call my bee garden, and
Ah.
I think it was that those first moments of appreciating bees and other beneficial insects into the garden.
Mm-hmm.
And I built it from scratch. It was a bare patch of dirt. I hauled massive logs from the forest that had been fallen, and then I layered bracken and fern and
Mm.
manure that I found, and yeah, just kept piling it up like a massive lasagna. And over the winter months, I covered it and allowed it to do its thing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and in the spring, I took the cover off, and it was a ready garden, and off I set about planting it out, and yeah, it was wild and ramshackle and beautiful. It's
Oh,
yeah, I made a cute little fence to go around it, from timber, and yeah, it was
gorgeous.
just absolutely gorgeous. My favorite
Yeah.
garden to date.
Oh, lovely. Oh, I
Yeah,
love the images that evokes and that the kind of time and care and the sort of trust in the seasons and leaving it to grow and the whole organic process, the magic of creating a garden.
yeah,
Such a lovely image.
yeah.
So that was your bee garden, your favorite
That
garden
was,
that you can
yep,
recall. And
yeah.
when you describe creating gardens everywhere you go, I'm brought to mind of Julia of the Herbs. And we were talking about her earlier, and she was also a herbalist who traveled extensively and built gardens wherever she went. Not only that, she traveled
Yeah.
with children in tow and a pack of Afghan hounds, which is just absolutely incredible for someone who she traveled around the States and all around Europe and with the travelers and so on. And
Amazing, right?
yeah. So both of us, we were introduced to Juliet of the Herbs while we were studying. So yeah, tell me
Yeah.
a little bit about, how you relate to Juliet, because she's an inspirational herbalist. I know for almost all the herbalists that I've come across. When I was a herbal student, it was the video was put on for us as part of our studies, and she's just an iconic herbalist, particularly herbalists who have the wanderlust, who love to travel, and she has shown us what is possible. And particularly when you think of gardens, well, I think when anybody thinks of garden, you think of a place and being grounded and rooted, and there is this sense of needing to spend time with it. It's quite difficult for travelers to cultivate gardens, as I am currently in this flux mode. I have this strong inclination to get plants for my mum's little balcony. She lives in an apartment here in Penang in Malaysia, and so I often have this draw to have plants. The one in particular is the blue pea butterfly, which is really commonly grown and just tumbles out of over people's fences and stuff. So it's quite easy to forage, in fact, and it grows wild.
Oh, beautiful.
Yeah, but I resist. I've got a strong desire to buy plants for her garden, but I know that the minute I leave, that they will become abandoned and neglected, because she, as she likes to say, she doesn't have a green thumb, which I don't believe. But yes, she's just it's not her thing at this moment in time.
Yeah.
But I'm curious to hear your connection with Juliet and her story as somebody who has a similar desire for travel and moving, but also that connection with the earth. And how do you relate, and how does that manifest in your life?
Yeah, it's quite a pure connection, isn't it? That that need and to be completely accepting and surrendering of the gardens that we tend. Because, like yourself, I love to travel. I'm a bit of a wanderer and a
Yeah.
gypsy, and so being able to create gardens with that knowing that you're not necessarily going to reap, the rewards of your efforts, and leaving them for other people is, I think, such a expression of unconditional love, really.
I love that.
Yeah, and I've it's a muscle that I've developed over the years, and I'm pretty adept at it these days, I've got to say. I do a lot of house sitting, and
Yeah.
which requires looking after not only people's homes, but also their pets and their gardens. And I love it. There's something thrilling about lovingly caring for people's belongings and handing them back to them, and the gratitude, from the recipient that comes from that.
Yes.
That's reward enough for me, really. Yeah.
Yes. Must be
Yeah.
such a blessing to have you as a house sitter with your love of gardens in particular. Anyone who's got a garden must be very lucky to have you tending to their space
Oh,
with
thank you.
your deep, connection and I mean, perhaps people don't know this so much about you. In fact, although we've connected over a few years, I wasn't aware of your roots in gardening and your sort of direct experience with the land, and even into your ancestry and so on. So you're
Yeah.
very deeply rooted.
Yeah.
And I'm recalling, so you also have some Scottish connections along the way, because I do remember when we first connected and you were quite keen to come to Scotland at the time, but it isn't the right time now. But I'm aware that there's some longings to connect with places in Europe, and we've
Deep
discussed this a bit
longings.
in the past, but I'd love to kind of hear where you're at with that today. Is that something that's on your agenda, still on your bucket list?
Oh, it most certainly is. I have such deep burning longings for Scotland,
Mm.
as I'm learning a lot of people do. I think
Hmm.
yeah, I think a lot of us who have ancestry that
Mm.
delve back into or originate from Scotland have this sense of not feeling complete until we've, visited our homelands of
Hmm.
origin. And so I
Yeah.
have quite a few ancestral lineages that originate from Scotland.
Okay.
And yeah, and there's just something in me that knows that I need to put my hands and feet on the earth there. I don't know, to unlock some very deep rememberings.
Hmm.
Yeah, so it's very, very strong. And yeah, I had actually booked a trip in 2020, and we all know what happened that year.
Yes.
Uh, heartbreak. Oh my gosh,
Oh.
dealing with
Oh.
the reality of not being able to go. But
Right.
yeah, that's okay. I know I'll get there and it will be
Yeah.
amazing. Um,
Yes.
yeah, and I'm really keen to explore, which is, how we connected in the first place.
Hmm.
The herb, the connections through herbalism, through
Yeah.
the, Scotland and Ireland and the UK as well in general. Yeah, most of my inspiration has come from America, weirdly enough,
Hmm.
which seems quite odd because I have that deep connection to Scotland. Yeah, I'm quite keen to get there and to meet herbalists and herbal gardens and yeah, and learn more about my roots and ancestry and where that might
Hmm.
have come from, you know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And are you aware of the parts of Scotland where your ancestry might have originated?
Yeah, there's quite a few areas. The
Hmm.
Perthshire area is one, and also up in the north around, I think the village is called Rafford, which
Right.
might be near Findhorn, sort of up on that
Oh,
coastline. Um,
okay.
and and I have traced some ancestry back to, I think, the Isle of Skye.
Oh, gosh.
Yeah, so that's going back to about the 1600s.
Right. It's going to be
Yeah,
quite the magical adventure finally overcoming all those obstacles and getting to Scotland when that time comes. And as you know, I live part of the time in Scotland. I have lived in Scotland since I was 13 years old, and it's only the past few years I've been reconnecting more with my roots back in Indonesia, being half Indonesian. But yeah, when we first connected, I was in Scotland at the time, and yeah, I hope that when you finally make it there, that I will be there for at least part of the time, so I can connect with you in person and
I would love
join you on
that.
some of these travels. um,
Yes. Imagine the
because
adventures we could have.
I know I'm there already.
Yeah.
At least in my imagination.
Mm.
And also, as although I have lived in Scotland as long as I have, there is a lot more herbal adventuring that I would like to do. And I last year I went up to the Highlands and Loch Ness and had some really beautiful wanderings around that very magical area. I just love how steeped in mythology and just magical fairy stories at every turn.
Yeah.
You're going to love it. And
Yes, I
I also
will.
want to explore more. I think absence makes the heart grow fonder. And sometimes when I'm in Scotland, I just take it for granted. And I could be going and exploring different places every weekend, but there's also beauty in exploring and connecting with your local area, and so much variety in itself, which
Yes.
I know you're aware of. But there's an appreciation of both the localities, but also the new, the undiscovered. And I know because I've had a look at your chart in the past. You have some Sagittarius influence. I think that's your Mercury or something like this.
Yes. Yeah, it's pretty
Um,
strong actually.
mhm.
Yeah, and sort of born with my son at the anaretic degree of
Mm-hmm.
Scorpio, kind of
Mm-hmm.
gives me a bit of Sagittarius flavoring as well.
Yes,
Yeah.
yeah.
Mm.
Just so this kind of deep Sagittarian kind of uh, influence.
Yeah, I really
Sparking
identify
that.
with some of the wild, adventurous, spirited
Mm-hmm.
side of Sagittarius, but also
Mm-hmm.
that that need for deep knowledge and
Yes.
of higher powers, spirituality,
Yes.
yeah, magic.
It's a beautiful combination. Yeah.
Yeah,
That
yeah,
Scorpio Sagittarius blend. Well, that's it's sort of leading me. Well, there's again a couple of questions. Well, just because we're going there, I know that recently you've been deepening your healing practice because you started off in remedial massage all the
hmm
way back when, and then got into herbal medicine, and recently you're going through what you describe as a business rebirth with
yes,
some new
yep,
modalities that you've added, and I'm curious to hear a little bit more about that if you'd like to share
yeah, yeah, I would,
how
yeah.
you're moving through all that currently.
Yeah, it's I feel like my practice is just ever deepening, and
Mm-hmm.
I am an eternal student and seeker,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
and curious of life in general, and yeah, what what lay ahead.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so at 30, I studied remedial massage.
Yeah.
It wasn't until I was about 44 that I studied herbal medicine.
Mm.
And at the age of 52, I began studying mental health and
Mm-hmm.
counselling, which I
Right.
completed at the end of last year.
Right.
Um, yeah, I'm really enjoying the deep dives into
Mm.
psychology and
Mm-hmm.
the whys and the wherefores behind, people's ailments and
Yeah.
conditions and sufferings.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Yeah, it's such oh gosh, I don't think I could ever stop learning about this subject.
Yes.
And I probably will be learning for the rest of my years.
No doubt.
Um,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I've had this grief period of letting go of being a herbalist,
Okay.
um, and the understanding that actually I'm not letting go. I'm just
Mm-hmm.
being reborn so
Mm-hmm.
that I can weave in these newfound
Mm-hmm.
skills and qualifications. It's been a bit of a journey, but yeah, I am deep in the rebirth phase at the moment.
Yes.
Mm.
Amazing. But you are, when you say giving up being a herbalist, you are still accepting patients, I
Oh yes,
believe.
absolutely.
Yes, you
Yes,
are. Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
And you still have your business kind of open, so to speak, even though maybe the physical appearance of it has changed over
Yes,
time.
that's right.
Um, so, I'm put to mind of that symbol of the butterfly where you just have to kind of let go of all the physicality in order to let um, the new manifestation of it to be birthed. And yeah, but I also hear that there is, of course, grief around that when we form relationships and connections with land and people and places, and having to shift out of that.
Yeah,
Um,
and also shifting away from, those rigid beliefs of what it needs to look like.
mhm.
Yeah, and I think that's where, possibly what I was referring to with the grief of letting go of that and
Yes.
realizing that I'm not actually letting go.
Mm.
I'm allowing. I'm allowing
Yeah,
the new to come through, and
it's
that's really
beautiful.
exciting. Yeah,
It is exciting. I'm excited
yeah,
to see where this new learning chapter is going to lead you, and with the mental health and the counseling and so on, that's really going to deepen your connection with supporting your herbal clients. I mean, I know a lot of we as herbalists we work holistically, and we're dealing body, mind, and spirit. But there can sometimes be a bit more of this leaning towards more the physical symptoms. I think, even if we call ourselves holistic, I think people want their physical symptoms healed. But the roots are very much in our emotions and, our spiritual condition and all of these things. So it's beautiful that has now been layered into your practice, and especially with your vast experience of connecting directly with the earth, to see how that will be brought in. I can relate a lot with working in the mental health realms, because when I was a new herbalist, I had an opportunity. A friend of mine had been offered a position as a foraging guide, and she was about to do a PhD in nutrition, and it wasn't her thing, but she knew that I was quite keen to do more foraging. As I don't know about your course, but our experience of actually direct connection with nature was sort of limited to I did it at Napier University in Edinburgh, and although there's a lot of natural areas, when you're studying, our access to nature was the car park behind the Astley Ainslie Hospital, where we used to have our training. So it was just going for little herb walks, looking at the weeds in the car park, which are fairly extensive in themselves. Even in the car park kind of concreted area, there's still plenty of healing medicine to be found there.
But possibly not quite the image you had in your mind when you first embarked on your studies. I want to be a herbalist, and I'm going to be with the plants. And
exactly.
Yeah.
There's a lot more theory and the sort of medical training, the medicine and the pathophysiology and all the kind of heady stuff, which is important, of course, when you're dealing with people's health and the responsibility that we take on that. But so the foraging job that I was offered, it was for a group called Outlook Project, which was offering free services to mental health users in Edinburgh. So I was very fortunate to get to deepen my knowledge and learning of plants alongside taking people who just a really gentle, intuitive healing and going out as a community. That's healing in itself, just that connection with other people, but doing that in nature. And so for myself, I was having to learn about all the local plants so that I could share knowledgeably about them. And so over a period of 8 years, I did get to know all the green spaces, well, not all the spaces, but quite a lot of green spaces around and about Edinburgh's cycle path, like the places that are easy to take groups and so on. And Edinburgh's got a vast number of parks and things like that. But I can see, sometimes the healing isn't necessarily in, going deeply into a consultation, but simply being with people in nature. And I can imagine with your, although you can go deeply in a one-to-one consultation, with your work in gardens, and that plants, and that this is cycling me back to your plant spirit connection, because you mentioned Findhorn as a place where some of your roots originate through your Scottish ancestry, but you were also inspired by the gardens at Findhorn, and that sparked your journey into plant spirit connections. So please share a bit more about that, because I'm aware that you have done some group work in the past, maybe soon, or I don't know if you've got anything planned around that, but I know in the past that you have done a lot of intuitive plant work with groups and so on. So tell me a little bit more about how that all started flourishing through your connection with Findhorn.
Yeah. So I'm going to take you back to that magical land where I uncovered the stone spiral. And in the cabin where I was living, there was a book called Findhorn Garden Story. I don't know if you're familiar with the book.
No, I'm not familiar
Um,
with the book. I have been to the gardens, but yeah,
well,
tell me more.
I read the book and it blew me wide open. I had no prior knowledge or understanding or awareness
Mm-hmm.
that
Mm-hmm.
that we could communicate with plants in this way.
Mm-hmm.
So the story is basically the tale of the three founders of Findhorn and their journey there, what they began with, how they uh, formed the most beautiful, lush paradise in impoverished soils on a coastline in the north of Scotland.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm sure many people know where Findhorn is, so they can relate to this story. But the book goes on to describe how each of those three founders developed a relationship with the plant devas and
Mm-hmm.
how they received information, how each of the species wanted to be tended to, cared for, what conditions they required, what food they needed. Yeah, and it opened me up to that beautiful, magical world of communication with plant spirit. I got so much out of reading the book. I would put put the put my recent knowledge to test by going out into the garden and having a go at chatting with the plants and seeing what would come from that. And
Mm-hmm.
yeah, one day my friend who owned the land said to me, "Look, I've got some excavators coming to the land in the next few days, and they're going to take out a few trees, and I'm a bit worried for the trees.
Mm-hmm.
Would you mind going around the property and having a word with them, just to let
Uh-huh.
them know that it's going to be okay, that we're not wiping out their species, and
Mm-hmm.
we need to do this necessary work of removing a few of them so we can build our next home here.
Right.
But just reassure them and tell them it's going to be okay."
Mm-hmm.
I thought, oh, all right. I haven't never done that before, but all right,
Yeah.
let's give that a go.
Yes.
Yeah, so I did, and that was my
Oh.
first kind of real moment, and I really got
Mm-hmm.
into it. I was quite enthusiastic
Mm-hmm.
about it,
Mm-hmm.
and really very reverent and serious with my work, talking to the
Yes.
trees,
Oh.
and it was beautiful. Um, I felt this. It's hard to describe actually, but it was like just a knowingness of there being a connection. And though no words or visuals were being received, there was a feeling that we were having we were having dialogue.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, so from there, I went on and read a few more books. The amazing Pam Montgomery has written about plant spirit communication, and I gobbled her book up with great gusto.
Mm-hmm.
And also, similarly, the late Stephen Harabuna also um, has a lot of work published about
Mm-hmm.
communicating with plant spirits.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, I was really taken by my work with the trees and felt a calling to share that with others. So I developed a workshop called Plant Spirit Communication, where I
Beautiful.
lead people through a deepening into into the other world. I use my medicine drum to guide a meditation through into that deep space, into the deep psyche,
Mm-hmm. Mm.
and then instruct people to go out and find a plant that might be, waving to them or calling them in some way, and to sit
Mm-hmm.
and commune with the plant. Yeah, and I usually give people a sheet of paper that has a few guidelines on, what
Yeah.
they might like to ask, and and maybe they feel called to sing to the plant, or to draw it, or to touch it, or to simply sit there quietly in stillness with it, and then to wait in that soft, slightly meditative state, just to wait. Sometimes the messages come through in whispers, and as you know, we hear these things very differently. My particular clair gift is clairsentience, so it's
Hmm.
it's an all feeling thing, but some
Yeah.
people are more visual, some are, some hear.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, but mine's the
Beautiful.
sensing. Mm.
Hmm. Oh, that's so, yeah, I'm feeling this sense of peace and connection with the plants, just imagining how you run the workshop and the experience of people while they're there. It's a beautiful gift, I think, to be able to facilitate healing space within nature, because nature is all around and it's bursting out at the seams, but it can somehow become quite invisible unless that, yeah, as you've described through your journey, there's been little nudges and other friends kind of waking you up to the flower connection, or it may be a symbol like a spiral that's kind of calling you to kind of deepen into the more medicinal side of things, and books and guides and things that we connect of people from different lands, even if we've not been to them. You're mentioning America, and yeah, they've got quite a strong output of education and inspiring herbal guidance from the many, and of course worldwide. I sort of feel like it would be quite interesting to touch, because you mentioned to me about how, although you were inspired by a lot of American herbalists, there is an Australian herbalist who's quite renowned in Australia, who has come up against a lot of challenges. I can relate to that from my sort of early days as I graduated from my course in 2009, and it was around that time that there's all this talk about having to, all across Europe, herbal medicine was becoming wouldn't be legal to practice, and so including myself, we were getting into this raising awareness of herbal medicine as a profession. And there's a lot of voices back and forth, but there were, at least at the time, maybe a bit less these days, a lot of people not wanting herbal medicine. And actually the course that I did at Napier University, which is a Bachelor of Science, it's actually been discontinued since I graduated, and they say it's for economic reasons, but I know from behind the scenes that it isn't. It was from people who don't appreciate herbal medicine as being a scientific course of study, which, of course, if it's not being studied at that level, then how can we, it's a catch-22, isn't it? So, if we can briefly just touch on your experience, because I know that was a herbalist, or is a herbalist, that you have been very much inspired by, in terms of the challenges that herbalists and herbal medicine faces in our modern world.
Yeah, yeah. Dorothy Hall, who's since passed away, was probably the most recognised Australian herbalist,
Mm-hmm.
particularly in those foundational years.
Yeah.
And you have to remember that in Australia we don't have that rich history
Mm-hmm.
of herbal medicine practices, aside from the
Mm-hmm.
indigenous, which is a whole separate topic altogether.
Yes.
But as far as Western herbal medicine is concerned, yeah, Dorothy Hall was one of the early founders of that practice of craft in Australia,
Mm-hmm.
and she fought really hard to have that recognised as as a respectable, reputable natural medicine practice, and would often be slammed by the media and other authoritative figures,
Yeah.
um, as as herbalism being too woo woo, or not sciencey enough, or
Mm-hmm.
yeah. And she fought back hard, and I watched a couple of interviews with her, with somebody in the media, and she really stood her ground, and she fought really, really hard for all of us.
Mm-hmm.
And for that alone, I respect her immensely.
Yes.
one of the situations I'm thinking of specifically was when comfrey was banned in Australia for
Right.
internal use.
Mm-hmm.
And it was the banning was based on a really, I don't know, loosely,
Mm-hmm.
collection of events that occurred where a person had died
Yeah.
and from consuming comfrey. Um,
Mm-hmm.
what wasn't discussed was that the person had a pre-existing liver condition
Yeah.
and was drinking copious quantities of comfrey, which
Right.
in large doses can be, really toxifying to the liver,
Absolutely.
and died.
Yes.
Yeah. Uh, so the whole argument was based upon that
Mm.
situation. And yeah, she fought long and hard, and over the course of a couple of years was able to get that ban lifted. Um,
Mm. That's incredible.
so
What an
incredible.
achievement. Yeah.
Yeah, huge achievement. So that was
Mm-hmm.
just one of many stories about
Yeah.
Dorothy. I
Mm.
think she was also one of the first formal educators in
Right.
Australia.
Mm-hmm.
So I had quite a few friends that
Yes.
learned from her way back in the day.
Yes.
So these are the 70s and 80s and 90s we're
Yeah.
talking about.
Yeah.
Yeah, so a long time ago.
Oh.
And yeah, her books, she's got plenty of books available, but they're getting harder to find. And
Mm.
I've luckily um, lucky to have found a couple in secondhand bookshops.
Great.
And yeah, she was also one of the first herbalists that I know of here to introduce drop dosing,
Mm-hmm.
which is a
Oh,
very,
that's
you know,
interesting. Yeah.
homeopathic-like,
Yes. Yeah.
style of practice.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah, so I really, embodied that subtle medicine
Mm-hmm.
essence.
I love
Yeah,
that. Yeah.
yeah, yeah,
Oh,
yeah. So yeah, a
yeah.
remarkable woman, and yeah, hard to find written material because she was actually quite
Mm-hmm.
protective about her works
Mm.
being released.
Mm.
And a friend of mine said to me that one of the requirements of studying with Dorothy was that anything learned in class and
Mm-hmm.
any class materials handed out were not to be shared publicly ever. So she
Mm.
was pretty, pretty, pretty solid with that.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
yeah, since her
Yeah.
passing, I think she's been um, deceased for about 20 years or thereabouts.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
There have been several of her early students that have been working hard to get her works
Mm-hmm.
out there in the public eye. And
Yes.
yeah,
Yeah. I can
mm,
understand that, in the environment in which, she was practicing and teaching, naturally she would have felt quite defensive with all the attacks and the fighting to have to get herbal medicine out there and to make sense of these rulings. That it's a bit of a minefield, and still is to a certain extent, but it feels like things may be shifting, although who knows, things. But it's fantastic to connect with herbalists, or people who are passionate about herbs and herbal medicine around the world. And I think just purely through our connection and sharing it and teaching it in our local communities, that keeps it alive, and people still see the relevance and importance of herbal medicine in our modern day world, not just as an ancient relic of these laughable practices that the ancients dabbled with. That
yeah,
they're still very, very much relevant in our lives today.
yeah, yeah.
So yeah, we could carry on talking about this, I think, for hours and days, in fact. But I think we'll have to draw to a close. But just to finish off, I'm curious to hear a little bit about how, while you are traveling, how do you incorporate herbs and plants into your travels when you're not with your garden, and to kind of support you or support your plant connections, or even just as a healing remedy when you are on the move?
Yeah, gosh, great question.
Mm-hmm.
and I'm sure you can resonate with my answer, is I struggle to limit what I take. I
I
want to take the
totally
lot.
resonate.
I want to take my whole apothecary with me.
Yes.
Um, but I generally like to travel with some homeopathics.
Mm-hmm.
And I've got this great little pint size homeopathic first aid kit that I
Mm-hmm.
purchased
Mm-hmm.
in a little leather zip up pouch. And it's so
Mm.
light and transportable. So that definitely comes with me everywhere. Um,
Nice.
I love chamomile. Chamomile is one of my all-rounder, all-time favorite herbs,
Mm.
and I love that it, can soothe and calm and relax. And, if I've got any kind of inflammation going on in the body, it can
Mm-hmm.
tackle that. It can soothe a cranky tummy.
Yes.
I just love chamomile so much, and I will often travel with a small bottle of the tincture. And
Mm-hmm.
wherever I go, I purchase herbal tea, even if it's a tea
Mm-hmm.
bag.
Yeah.
Yeah. Um,
Yes.
and then I've always got a tonic on the go,
Uh-huh.
and it'll have a nervine and maybe an antiviral, because we get sick when we travel a lot. I do. I'm
Absolutely.
really sensitive,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
new environments, trigger
Mm-hmm.
different responses in my body.
Mm.
Um, so and planes, oh,
Yes.
um, so I've often got an antiviral, so something I'll take if I feel, the glands in my neck start to come up.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, and a tonic of some sort.
Lovely.
Essential oils, always.
Yes.
Yeah.
I try and
Uh,
limit them to a maximum of five,
oh,
which gets heavy. But it depends on the scale of my travels because I have been spending extensive periods of time in Southeast Asia, so I'm aware that. So I've limited myself to five. I think it's actually more than that because then I accumulate them locally as well, and but then I'll take little mini trips away, and then my kind of, if I had to choose one, it would be lavender because it
me
kind of
too.
covers so many. It's a
Yeah.
medicine bottle, and that this has been since before I trained as a herbalist. Lavender's always been my intuitive, all-in-one
Yeah.
panacea remedy
Oh,
essential
it's
oil.
brilliant. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Me too. Yeah. I'm with you there.
And
Yeah.
I smiled when you said chamomile, and particularly the tea bags because
Yep.
yeah, here in Malaysia, I mean, there's a lot of Chinese herbal medicine shops, which is not my area of expertise, although, there are one or two Chinese herbs that have transferred across to Western herbal medicine practice. But I just love how accessible things like chamomile and peppermint are, that you can, I mean, of course, if you can get the loose herb that you've grown biodynamically yourself, far superior, but needs must sometimes, particularly when
Yes.
you're on your travels. And
Yeah.
there's a lot of power in a tea bag of chamomile that we
Absolutely.
underestimate. Yeah, so I
Yeah.
get you on that. And with that, I just want to thank you so much for coming on to the Wanderlust Herbal Podcast. How can people connect with you and find you after this podcast if they're interested in learning more about you? And please let us
Yeah.
know.
I'm fairly present on social media on
Mm-hmm.
Facebook and Instagram as
Yeah.
Blessed Botanicals.
Yes.
I'm currently um, uh, rejigging my website at the moment, so that's not available at
Mm-hmm.
present.
Mm.
But perhaps by the time the podcast goes to air, it will be.
Okay.
The website address is blessedbotanicals.com. And
Great.
my email address is fiona.blessedbotanicals@gmail.com.
Perfect.
Yeah. And
Great.
I like to post a lot about my travels and about the
Aha.
plants that I meet on my travels.
Perfect.
Yeah, so yeah, please reach out. Yeah,
Yes.
always happy to have a conversation about herbs with people.
Lovely. Oh, well, thank you. And it is always a joy to see these little pop-ups of where you are next. Where is
Yep,
feed today?
that's right. Yeah.
At various parts of the east coast of Australia and New Zealand and things, more often than not. But at some point, hopefully, we'll have you over in Europe. Not that I'm there at the moment, but I will be at some point.
Scotland, look out.
Scotland, yeah,
Here
yeah.
come the two fees.
Exactly. Yes.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank
Thank
you
you so much.
again. And
Yeah, thank you for having me.
pleasure. All right. Bye bye.